Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Policy Exchange. My name is Lucy Lee, and I lead the Education Unit here. I would like to warmly welcome the Minister for Education and Childcare, Elizabeth Truss, to Policy Exchange. This has been a long-anticipated speech, and we are delighted that the Minister is here today to set out her vision for early education and childcare. Our report, Quality Childcare, published yesterday, is available at the back of the room. We highlight that people living in the most deprived areas of the country are receiving poorer quality childcare. We would like to see fresh impetus behind improving the quality of early years childcare. And our ideas include extending Teach First to attract bright graduates into the most deprived areas, supporting the establishment of childcare networks based on teaching schools to share best practice across the sector, directing financial support towards low-income families so that they can choose childcare providers based on quality and not cost, and therefore increase the demand for high quality in low-income areas. We believe that improving the quality of childcare has to be a priority for early years policy, and I'd like to now hand over to the Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Lucy, for your introduction. It's a pleasure to attend events here at Policy Exchange, and I congratulate you on your rigorous and informative report on childcare. You make a number of very pertinent observations, not least in highlighting how much the quality varies across the country, and especially between richer and poorer areas. You're absolutely right to stress that making it easier for parents, and mothers in particular, to be able to combine family with work matters enormously, to them as individuals, to their families, and to the wider economy. Many parents, of course, want to stay at home, and we are fully supportive of that. But it's simply my job to help to make sure parents have a genuine choice. Much of the debate about childcare provision centres on cost, and of course this has a massive impact. Many feel that childcare is so expensive they cannot afford to work at all, let alone build a career. I'm determined to address this, and some of the measures we're announcing today will simplify the system and mean that more money gets to the front line. But we also need to address the issue of quality, which is very important and we ignore at our peril. To quote the title of our report today, we want to see more great childcare. This report is partly our response to Professor Cathy Nutt-Brown's Foundation for Quality, which looked in detail at the qualifications regime for early education and childcare. But it also addresses some of the structural issues in the childcare system, because before making fresh demands on resources, we need to make sure that every penny parents and government spent is used effectively. Yesterday, I visited the superb nursery at Durand Academy, and I can see the head teacher in the audience. It's a brilliant educational establishment that shows how effective institutions are every bit as life-changing as the worst ones. The school is incredible. It runs from age 3 to 7, and when the children arrive at primary school, they really are ready to learn, and I've seen it firsthand. It's fantastic. And that's what I want every child in the country to have the opportunity to have. I want every child to be able to access that quality of early education. The Jesuits famously said, "Give me the child for his first 7 years, and I give you the man." As my colleague Andrea Leadsom has observed, science now suggests that the Jesuits may have been significantly overestimating, as people like Baroness Greenfield have made clear how the brain develops or how it fails to develop in the first few years of a person's life is utterly critical. It never makes sense to give up on anyone. But the fact is that much of what a child experiences well before the age of 7 has an enduring effect on their life chances. Research for the Foundation Years Action Group by academics from UCL, the Institute of Education in Bristol, has laid this out in stark terms. At the age of 15 or 16, English pupils score 492 on the average PISA maths score, compared to 555 in Hong Kong, 562 in Singapore, and 600 in Shanghai. Yet that gap at attainment is evident way before the age. The gap between England and East Asia does not differ between the ages of 9 or 10 and 15 or 16. It's already there by 5 years old, and we can see that from the recent evidence. If we look at international comparisons of how many children could complete early numeracy tasks when they started at primary school, we see the same countries at the top of the list of the table as when we are comparing the abilities of adults, countries like Chinese Taipei, Hong Kong, and Singapore. So when parents hand their child over to the care of a childminder or a nursery, they're not just entrusting them with their child's physical safety, they are also entrusting them with their child's brain. And it is vital that staff have adequate vocabulary and numerical ability. The 21st century will belong to those countries that win the global race for jobs and economic advantage. And in order for every child to fulfill their potential, they need to be properly equipped with essential skills from the very beginning of their lives. All of this evidence leads to the inescapable conclusion: childcare in this country must be world-class. No school is better than its teachers, and I'm grateful to Professor Nut-Brown for her work in assessing the overall landscape of qualifications for those working in early education and childcare. She has said very clearly that too many people who work with young children are underqualified, and the system for qualifications is confusing, with over 400 different qualifications available. I agree with her. Given what we know about early years development, it's no longer acceptable that childcare professionals are not required to have a GCSE grade C or above in English and maths. Professor Nut-Brown says in her report, if we are going to improve the quality of early childhood and education, we cannot allow individuals to slip through without level 2 English and maths. I think the international context underlines all this. In France, at least 40% of staff in creches must hold a diploma, which is a demanding 3 years post-16 course. And many of the creches I've seen, 100% of those staff are qualified. In the Netherlands, certified childcare workers must train for 3 years post-18. Childcare professionals in Denmark need 3 to 5 years of vocational or tertiary education. These and other countries recognise that looking after children is an extremely important job, and that attitude is reflected in higher levels of skills and pay. Contrastingly, Professor Nut-Brown's report raises serious concerns about the quality of training and qualifications in our country. She wrote, "The hair or care stereotype still exists for many considering a course in early years, yet many other sectors have raised their expectations. It must be a cause of concern that early years courses are often the easiest to enrol on, and the courses that students with the poorest academic records are sometimes steered towards." The interim report quotes Helen Perkins, head of early years and childhood at Solihull College. She says, "We demand that students need a relevant level 2 qualification before they are able to handle animals independently on our animal care courses at Solihull College. Nobody demands the same level of qualification before you can be left alone with a baby." Plainly, this trend is both extremely worrying and insupportable. I want to see a high-quality, high-qualified workforce here. I want their work to be underpinned by effective regulation and inspection that targets support where it's most needed. But I also want childcare professionals to be trusted to use their professional experience and judgment. We won't get where we want to be overnight, but we're moving in the right direction on quality and qualifications. But I don't think we can overlook the fact that the commitment to make further improvements means giving providers the headroom to pay higher salaries. I also want to be clearer to nurseries and parents about what these qualifications are and what they mean. We will introduce graduate-level early years teachers, specifically trained to teach young children. The EPI report showed that children make much better progress in preschool centres where trained teachers are present. And that's exactly what I saw the children at Durham Academy doing from age 3 onwards. They were there with a qualified teacher. I think that's very important. We will seek more crossover between primary school teachers into early years and early years teachers into primary school. There have been strong and persuasive calls to bring back the nursery nurse diploma, and we will create early years educators backed by improved level 3 qualifications. This will offer strong practical experience and require candidates to have at least a C in English and maths. In order to improve this, we have to attract people into the profession. Too many people make it through sheer dedication, finding it to be a terrific slog. I am convinced that it will be tough to attract high-quality people given existing wage levels. Staff in this country in nurseries earn about £6.60 an hour on average, little above the minimum wage. This speaks volumes about how much those working in early years have hitherto been valued. There is further to go, and we've learnt from other countries that deliver better value and better quality childcare. We have looked across Europe and beyond. The aim is not to replicate another country's approach, but to learn from and apply best practice. I've been struck by the high status and trust that afforded to childcare professionals in continental Europe. And in particular, I've been very impressed by what I've seen going on in France. The well-established system of école maternelle is being expanded to offer spaces for more 2-year-olds, whilst a mixture of crèche and childminder provision is in high demand for younger children. Many French families put down their child's name for a French crèche as soon as they discover they're pregnant because they are so popular. And nursery workers are paid around £16,000 a year, compared to £13,000 here. In return, candidates are expected to have higher qualifications. Unfortunately, our nursery staff are bottom of the league table of our near neighbours in terms of how much they're paid. And what you see about other countries is there's much less differential between pay in primary schools and early years. We have the biggest gap between those two. And I think we need to think of early years as much more of an extension of our education system rather than a separate area in that respect. Inspired by examples like Durand Academy, I want far more schools to offer childcare and early years education. We will facilitate this by abolishing the requirement on schools to register separately with Ofsted if they want to provide for children under the age of 3. And we will reform the burdensome statutory processes schools must follow if they want to take younger children. I hope also that some schools will want to run childminder agencies, which would allow well-qualified childminders to offer both group-based and home-based care and to employ their teaching expertise. This will have the added benefit of allowing children to engage with school early. Being able to take children to the same places will make life more convenient for many families too. It is telling, and I've been asked this question today, that I'm often asked about whether I would be able to look after a certain number of children. I think this line of inquiry betrays an attitude about the way we think about childcare, that somehow anyone who looks reasonably competent might be able to do the job. I don't start from the premise that anyone can be an early educator. It's a very demanding job that requires great and specialist expertise. I am not trained to do the job. I'm a politician, not an early educator. And I'm equally sure I would not be able to walk into a class of 30, 14-year-olds and teach them German. My ministerial colleagues at the Department of Health don't get asked if they would be willing to perform keyhole surgery. And those at the MOD aren't asked if they would fancy hopping on a helicopter and going into battle. Although I do suspect that Andrew Robotham and Mark Francois would be up for that. So working in early education isn't for everyone. It should be something we train and specialise people for. It's a professional career. And I think other European countries have taken a very different approach to the way they think about early education. And this is reflected in the amount of flexibility they allow on ratios. They think that the quality of staff in nurseries is the most important thing. Whereas in England, nursery staff may look after no more than 4 2-year-olds. In France, they can be responsible for 8. In Ireland, they can be responsible for 6. And there are no national limits set in countries like Denmark, Germany, or Sweden, because they trust childcare professionals to make the right judgments about children in their nurseries. And that is why we're encouraging nurseries to use their professional judgment and enjoy greater flexibility. We're only doing this where nurseries are employing highly qualified staff, and we see this as a way of improving qualifications and levels of pay. Whether as an early years educator leading a group of children we plan to allow ratios for 2-year-olds to rise from 4 children per adult to 6 children per adult, and for 1s and under to rise from 3 per adult to 4. We are not changing the ratios for 3 and 4-year-olds, but we would like to see nurseries in the private and voluntary sector using the full allowance of 1 to 13 with a teacher to have traditional style nursery classes. Many of our leading providers are successfully delivering this model, including the academy I mentioned earlier. But that happens less in the private and voluntary sector for various reasons. We think that teacher-led groups with structured activity are a good thing, and Ofsted has made it clear to me that they do too, and they want to see evidence of well-qualified staff engaging directly with children. Of course, parents may demand other approaches and other learning styles, and I think it's important parents have that choice. But it's also important that parents have the choice of this model, which works well, and I've seen work very, very well in France. We also want to see parents have the choice of more structured group care for their 2-year-olds, like the French crèche system. These groups would be led by a qualified early years educator. We know that 2 is an absolutely crucial age where children are learning the structure of language and vocabulary, and it's very important to have well-qualified people. We are hardwired to be inquisitive. We want to learn, and we take pleasure from learning. Think about the joy on a toddler's face as they take their first steps, or how proud a 4-year-old is when they earnestly tell you what the French word for yes is. I totally reject the idea that children in a nursery can either have an educational day or an enjoyable one. Ros Marshall of Kids Unlimited has proved that this is bunk. She does outstanding work, for example, encouraging children to learn how to count when they are playing musical instruments. Far from killing any pleasure that a child might get out of learning, structure and clear guidelines provide reassurance and safety. Rather than crushing spontaneity and discovery, they offer an essential framework for precisely those things, and we are absolutely clear that this is fully compatible with the EYFS. My insistence that children are well educated from the very beginning of their lives isn't just about getting ahead in the global race, crucial though that is. It's a recognition that children's lives should be complete and fulfilled. This is not just about the economy, it's also about personal happiness. We also want to see more options for home-based care. We've seen a decrease in the number of childminders over recent years. This is in part because childminders have to be business owners as well as child carers. When setting up, this means registering with Ofsted, the local authority, finding training, marketing the service to parents, and collecting fees. And as well as the role of caring for and educating young children, there's a lot of paperwork, administration, chasing up parents for payments, and jumping through hoops set by the local authorities involved. Some people want a simpler way to enter the profession. So we are setting up one-stop shops, or rather we are enabling people to set up one-stop shops called childminder agencies, which will do the practicalities. So this means that somebody interested in being a childminder can go to a local agency, have their premises checked out, receive training, and be approved all by a single organisation, which itself will be regulated by Ofsted. This agency will deal with government funding, marketing services, placing children, and collecting fees from parents. Similar organisations in France and the Netherlands have created a good entry route for childminders, meaning there are many more childminders compared to the population size of those countries than there are here in England. These measures, coupled with the removal of hoops to jump through from local authorities to receive government funding, should see a revival in this very important form of care. This will be particularly important for parents in rural areas who have a lack of facilities nearby, for those working shifts or irregular hours like MPs, and I would like to have this opportunity myself, and other people who want more flexible home-based care. And what's more, agencies will be able to offer cover if a childminder is on holiday or ill. And we've all been in the kind of situation where childcare arrangements have fallen through in the last minute. and these agencies will be able to provide for that. I know at the moment what I do is get on the phone to Leeds, to my mum, to come and sort the situation out, but we need more options available for parents doing those more flexible jobs. We also want to give childminders more flexibility. At present, the ratio of one child under the age of 1 per childminders means that twins are a no-no without special permission. The limit for under 5s is 3 children, which is frankly fewer than many families have to cope with. And this gives rise to the situation I saw in my constituency, where 2 qualified childminders looking after 6 children between them, if they need a pint of milk, one of them has to take 3 children to the shop so that they're in compliance with Ofsted rules. In France, a childminder can look after up to 4 children under 5. In Denmark, childminders are able to look after 5 children, and there are no ratios at all for childminders in Sweden. We will bring our rules in line with France so that childminders can look after up to 4 under 5s, of which no more than 2 are under 1. This is, of course, a maximum. It's not a requirement, and that's something a point I would make about all our changes. And we would expect childminders to do what they or their agency are comfortable with. We're not asking anyone to do anything that they're not comfortable with. What we want is more professional judgment being exercised by childminders and nurseries. It's vital that the inspection regime is rigorous, comprehensive, clearly understood and fair. It must focus solely on what matters and not distract providers from looking after children and educating them. We are working with Ofsted to implement further improvements to the current regime, including increasing the number of HMIs covering the early years and concentrating inspection on those weaker providers that need most attention. I think this will help address some of the issues that Policy Exchange identified in their reports about poor quality. We are now saying that Ofsted alone will be the arbiter of quality. At the moment, local authorities also check the quality of provision, which is both a waste of resources and creates extra barriers for new providers trying to set up. Although we fund 3- and 4-year-old places at £2,200 per head, which is enough to cover the cost to nurseries for 15 hours a week, not enough of this money is reaching the front line, and I know that's a major concern for many providers. Local authorities retain £160 million annually of the funding intended to deliver early education to 3- and 4-year-olds, some of which is spent on duplicating work that Ofsted is already doing. Ending this situation will mean that as much money as possible goes to the front line, and I'm looking further at this because even with this change, I'm still not convinced that enough money is going to the front line, and we're looking at further improvements to the delivery system. Our commitment to a fair regime is such that we have heeded calls from those who ask for a new route allowing for paid-for re-inspection. If a nursery that received a satisfactory rating is taking steps to reach good or outstanding, I want this to be recognised and updated swiftly. Professionals should also be given the chance to think creatively about how they want children to learn. Better qualified staff will be able to do that. For some years now, politicians have stressed the importance of lifelong learning, but the term tends to be used to remind us that a person's education shouldn't end when they leave school or university. I believe that learning should genuinely be lifelong, which means it should start from the moment a child enters the world. We know that the first few years of our life shape the development of our brains. The evidence is clear that qualified teachers are best placed to offer strong developmental learning. Therefore, we need to increase the number of teachers involved in the early years. This is all part of our efforts to increase the quality of teaching across the piece for all ages. We will shortly publish the report by our Commission for Childcare, which I know many people are at bated breath waiting for, which will look at ways to tackle the high cost for parents and get better value for money. And we will be making sure that working parents find childcare more affordable. The status quo is neither fair to providers nor allows enough money to reach the front line, and I appreciate your patience in waiting to hear more about this. Getting the funding right is a necessary condition of providing world-class childcare, but it is not sufficient. It is not good enough to carry on with an unreformed system where frontline workers are paid £6.60 an hour. A greater focus on quality and value for money matters enormously as well. Some children enjoy more advantages than others, but all children are vulnerable, and of course parents want their child to have the best possible start in life. I want every child to spend their early years learning, exploring, enjoying and growing, and for them to arrive at primary school well prepared and confident. And by driving up standards right across early education, we can give parents the sense of security they crave and every child the care and attention they need. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Minister. We now have about 20 minutes or so for questions.
Yes. Can you hear me on the microphone?
Yes.
Yes? Can you hear it back? Good.
So we've got about 20 minutes or so for questions. Can I ask that you wait for the microphone, that you state your name and the organisation that you are working for any questions? Right, this lady here. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Helen Perkins from Solihull College.
Ah!
I regret that statement every day.
Really sorry about that.
I'm interested that, by the way, I'm really pleased about the qualifications and that practitioners are expected to be qualified. What does worry me is that you're intending to pay practitioners more to value them, which is absolutely right and proper, but how that will work with the ratios. If you're funding, I think you just mentioned 2,000 and a little for 2-year-olds, if you've got a ratio of 1:8, how is that going to equate? How is it going to get into the practitioner's pocket? How are we going to improve that?
Okay. Just to be clear, the 2,200 is for 3 and 4-year-olds, and that's to pay for 15 hours a week. There's a higher figure for 2-year-olds, which is 2,900, in recognition of the fact that the ratios are lower for 2-year-olds.
That still wouldn't equate to 16,000.
Sorry?
That still wouldn't equate to 16,000
£1,000 a year.
Practitioner.
Well, it does actually. We've worked out the economics. The amount of money the government spends in France is no different to what we spend here in Britain. It's about the amount of money that's reaching providers, and there are issues with the funding system. I've mentioned the fact that at the moment local authorities are retaining money to do quality checks, which we want to put all in the hands of Ofsted so more of that money can reach the front line. But I think there are other ways that money is leaking out in the system, and we will be looking at that in the Childcare Commission report, because I agree with you that is a big problem. But I think I think the point about ratios is that we have got a different balance between quality and quantity from other countries. And if you go into a French nursery and you see them operating on a higher ratio than I'm proposing, actually on a 1:8 ratio, the style of organisation and structure is different, and they do a very good professional job, which parents are very happy with. Virtually every other European country operates on a higher ratio, particularly for 2-year-olds, and that enables the providers to have the headroom to hire more qualified staff, and certainly quite a number of the providers I've spoken to here would like that headroom to be able to do that. So it's a trade-off, is what I'm saying.
A gentleman here.
Chris Waterman from Children's Services Weekly, and an early years teacher from some 40 years ago. I was interested, I heard you speak at the North of England about mathematics, and I'd be delighted to see some of your detailed workings following the last question. However, what I'm really interested in is you talk about examining how to attract bright graduates into early years. So are you thinking of a nursery first type model? And how does that fit with the increasing the quality of the graduates? Are you going to send people in after a 6-week summer holiday to teach in our early years settings?
Well, I read with interest Policy Exchange's recommendation about extending Teach First to early years, and I think that's a very interesting idea that we will be looking at, because I think we need much more of a continuum, I would suggest, in teaching between early years and primary school teachers. And one of the issues is that the salary differential is so vast in this country compared to other countries, and we're not going to get there overnight. And what I would say about a lot of these proposed changes is they're enabling. So we're not expecting nurseries on September the 1st to suddenly use these new ratios. What we're saying is, when you're able to hire staff, when you feel confident to be able to do that, if you want to operate in that way, then you will be able to. We're not saying you have to, and I think that's a very important point. And it's the same point about teachers. We want to see early years teachers doing the same tests for entry as school teachers. We're consulting on new teacher standards for early years teachers, but ultimately our ambition is to move to a much more continental style system where it's seen as a continuum, rather than you have one thing over here which is early years and childcare and one thing over here which is education. And I think, sorry to go on about Durham Academy, but I think it's a fascinating model that lots of people in this room would be well advised to see working on the ground, because they have children from age 3 to 7, and what's so interesting is that age 3 is much more focused on play, it's more informal, but it's still structured by a teacher. And by the time they get to age 5, they're doing more written work and so on. So it's a continuum of learning, and that's the way I want us to see early years much more, rather than a separate thing which people do.
And gentleman at the back wearing the dark jumper.
I'm Julian Grenier. I'm head of Sheringham Nursery School and Children's Centre in Newham. And I guess I ought to be somewhat pleased that you swiped a bit out of my blog post about the comparison between yourself and your colleagues in the health ministry. But what I then went on to say in that post is that looking at a kind of exhaustive range of international research, there isn't a single piece of research anywhere internationally that doesn't say that ratios are correlated with quality for children in early education and childcare. It's the most consistent indicator of quality according to international research. There is absolutely nothing in any of the research to support this policy on ratios. And so to go back to the comparison with your colleagues in health, I'm sure that they don't start making clinical decisions about how operations should be carried out or how sick people should be cared for. And what concerns me about this is that there seems to be an absolute ignorance of the international research on this issue.
They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and I found your blog post extremely interesting, which is why I used a part of it in what I had to say. Ratios are a factor, of course they are, but we're not increasing them beyond European levels. We're increasing them to the level that other European countries operate at. But the international research, so organisations like EPI, clearly show that the quality of people is very, very important. And having a teacher present and having a graduate present is really important. So everything else being equal, ratios are a factor. But if we are paying people £6.60 an hour who don't have GCSE in English and maths, that does not help the early education. And many nursery operators in this country who work in other countries like Ireland, like Scotland, which both have higher ratios than we do here in England, say that they are able to use the extra money that giving more headroom in ratios provides to hire higher quality staff. So the international evidence around ratios is a bit like the same discussion about class sizes. Class sizes are a factor, but they're not as important as the quality of the teacher. And that is what I think, given that we've got the lowest ratios in Europe and also the lowest salaries, we haven't got the balance quite right. And it works very well in other countries, and I think we should follow their example.
Denise.
Hi, Denise United for All Ages and the Good Care Guide. I wanted to pick up on your point about the existing early years funding, the free entitlement. And you talked about local authorities, if you like, creaming off some of that funding before it hits the provider. Going forward, do you see that as a ring-fenced? I mean, how are you actually going to police that?
Well, you're leading me here a bit on what, I would, let's just say for the 2-year-olds offer, we've been very clear that we're funding at a given rate based on local staff costs. We've encouraged local authorities to pass as much, if not all, through to the front line. So we've given a very clear steer on the 2-year-old funding. I would like to see more of that on the 3 or 4-year-old funding, because it's extremely frustrating sitting here in government funding places at quite a good rate and not seeing the money hit the front line. And we are doing what we can. All I can say is the machinery of government is sometimes more difficult to turn around on some of those things than it might be. But I'd absolutely like to see all the money we're going, my firm belief, and what is my driving motivation in all this, is I believe that the quality of people interacting with children is the most important thing. And the more money that we can get to those people, the more qualified those people can be, the better our early education system will be. And I think in the past, we've perhaps focused on the wrong priorities about how we regulate and assess quality. And one of the really important things we're doing is increasing the number of HMIs in early years from Ofsted to make sure that they're looking at outcomes. What is the impact on children? And of course, practitioners in nurseries will be able to make judgments about what is best for the children in their settings. And it may be that some children will benefit from a lower ratio or a higher ratio. It may be that some children, like the ones in Durham, benefit from a very structured approach. I want practitioners to have that ability to make a choice. We are the only country in Europe that specify quite so closely from Whitehall what every provider must do, and yet have such low standards on qualifications. Gentleman, second row.
You talked about how the 21st century will belong to the countries that are able to get ahead even at an early age. We read quite often stories of parents in countries like China and elsewhere who are having their children tutored or hot-housed even to learn to read at the age of 2. Is that something that we could or should try to compete with?
No. There was some rather erroneous reports saying that I wanted children to learn to read at age 2 and 3. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that we want people who are well qualified and well educated interacting with those 2-year-olds with the purpose of developing vocabulary, conversation, socialization, understanding all of those things, which often middle-class children can receive at home. We want every child to have access to that. So it's about the quality of care and the interaction and the spoken language. And I cited the example of Ros Marshall at Kids Unlimited and what they're doing in terms of teaching maths through music and singing and counting, and also they do basic Mandarin as well in some of their nurseries. So I think there are all kinds of interesting things that nurseries can do, but it's got to be age appropriate. We don't want children sitting with writing with chalk at age 2. That's not what I'm talking about.
It's Jessica Johnson, Kingston University, with the privilege of having worked with and trained early years practitioners right the way through level 3, through to their degree levels and early years professional status and beyond, sitting longing to share with them the expertise, the practice we're hearing here. They bring with them the passion, the resilience of working in early years, carrying out their degrees through long hours in the evening over time. And I'm just hoping within all of this, they really get their recognition now as they continue in support networks. So we're sitting in a nursery, on the floor in a den, with a group of staff as they were working with just coaching skills for each other to support their staff and raise that level in the settings. And they're out there now really as gems ready to take this forward for you, if that's within the programme now. And along, hopefully, do we need almost teach first when these people are just sitting there really excelling in practice?
Well, thanks for your question. And the title of a report is More Great Childcare, because there is brilliant people working in the profession already. We want early years professionals to be able to qualify as early years teachers and make that transition. I think the programme has been a success, and Kathy Nutt-Brown says so. I think one of the issues is about parents being able to understand what these levels of qualifications are, and that's why we're being very clear that there's a qualification called early years educator. The person having that will have GCSE in English and maths, they'll have practical experience, they'll have a good knowledge of child development. You know, they will be able to operate at that level. We'll also have early years teachers who are really qualified professionals who follow the same standards as school teachers. And I think it's absolutely about raising the status of the profession, because there are still some people in this country, and I've received a lot of this feedback today, who think people in childcare don't need English and maths. What's the point of that? And I think that's the wrong attitude. I think that this is about early education. So I'm very pleased that we're enhancing that programme.
The lady in the white top.
Sarah Jane Butler, Parental Choice. What I'm keen to understand is, despite the flow of money going direct from government bypassing local authorities, how are parents going to be able to afford this higher quality, higher paid staff when they're already having problems at the moment?
Well, what we're saying is that to be able to be more flexible at nurseries, so be able to take on more children, nurseries are going to have to hire higher quality staff if they want to do that. So we're saying take on more children, but with higher quality staff, like they do in France. The other thing we're doing is reforming the system so that more of the funding is getting through. So at the moment, some funding is being held at a local authority level. There are also other things we're doing in terms of helping working parents more generally, which we're about to announce in due course and which was announced in the midterm review. So it's partly about fixing the system to make more of the money go to the front line and to make it much simpler, but it's also about making sure we're fair across the income spectrum to help all working parents, and I think that's important as well. But what I'm saying on staffing arrangements is we want to give nurseries more flexibility over their staffing arrangements where they hire high quality staff, so they can make the judgment about, do I need an extra person or do I need a more qualified person? And I think many of the nursery groups I've spoken to welcome that flexibility because they want to be able to offer that higher quality care.
Lady in the front row with the grey cardigan.
Kitty Stewart from the London School of Economics. I welcome the emphasis on a better paid, more highly qualified workforce. I think the research evidence does show that that's really important. I'm also interested, as other people have said, to see the way the sums work out, because I think France does still spend considerably more, significantly more than we do overall. So that will be interesting to see. But I wanted to focus on one thing that you said which worried me, which is this idea that there's a lot of money to be saved by stopping the leakage at local authority level into what you call the sort of duplication of work that Ofsted already does. Because I think I've been to meetings of the local authority ECHAs network. So ECHAs is another quality measure, which in fact is much better correlated with later outcomes than Ofsted ratings are. And the work that they do is really impressive. They're working with nurseries and with practitioners to support them and to improve the quality of provision, to help them be self-reflective about their practice and so on. Between Ofsted inspections, which are every 4 years, so aren't doing that kind of day-to-day regular work. So maybe in the long run, when everybody's a graduate, you won't need that sort of support. But I'd be really worried, and I hope you're going to look really carefully at what that is doing before you cut that.
Well, there's various elements to that question. One is that Ofsted is increasing the number of HMIs, and they're also operating more locally. So, and Michael Wilshaw is going to outline in more detail what that will look like. And I think that's very important because we've got to remember Ofsted is the body that has the power to close nurseries that aren't performing. And one of the issues has been, and certainly local childminders have fed this back to me in Norfolk, is they don't know who to call if something goes wrong. So I want to have more genuine accountability to Ofsted. I think that will work well. In terms of the economics, I'll certainly share with you, my calculation about how the economics works, but it's certainly the case, and I know there are some of the nursery providers here today, that they feel they will be able to take on more qualified staff with this greater flexibility. I mean, there were a lot of bits of your question. I'm sorry if I haven't answered them all, I'm very happy to take them up afterwards because we get into some quite detailed mechanics about how, it's not the only reason that local authorities are duplicating work from Ofsted. There are other reasons why that 2,200 isn't all going to the front line. And one of it is it's all part of the direct schools grant. So some of it may be, some local authorities may be putting more money into schools than early years. So there are other factors as well, which is very difficult to get to the bottom of it. And one of the things we're trying to do is make the information much more transparent so providers know where the money's going and can voice their concerns at a local level.
Right, I've only got time for one more question, and the gentleman at the front has had his hand out for a long time, sorry.
Hi, I'm John Woodward from Busy Bees. We're involved in the UK, but we're involved in America, Singapore, Malaysia. So we've got the chance to look at different styles of childcare. And a lot of that's delivered in a different way, and a lot of that's very good. So we wouldn't be, we to change, so not to look at it, because we aren't comfortable with the burden that working parents have for the cost of childcare. We know we've got 20,000 parents and they really struggle to pay the bills. So any help we can provide for parents to do that has got to be good, as long as it doesn't compromise. And I don't think the suggestion is it will be compromised, it's look at how we're doing it. We wouldn't want to compromise the quality. And there are other ways of very quickly making it a bit more affordable for working parents, which we would entirely agree with. We would really welcome the idea that the money that should go to the early years sector does go to the early years sector. And the idea that there's a bit more flexibility in individual settings so that they can reflect the local community, the parents and all of those things, has got to be a good thing. We employ teachers in a lot of settings, and some of that's very good. I don't want, we've talked to a lot of staff today, and some of those haven't got the qualifications at that entry level, and they're brilliant people. So we mustn't miss the idea that, because we haven't got a qualification of being good with children, have we? And how do you measure that? But people's attitude, commitment, with those degrees of numeracy and literacy, are essential, but we've got to just be careful. We recognise, and it's not the easiest thing in the world, but I think it's nice you've provoked the debate, and that should continue, and we should have a mature debate on it. But there's some things there we like.
Thank you. And I just think you raised an interesting point, because this, we're not going to get to where we want to be overnight. We're in a status quo where the average nursery worker is paid £6.60 an hour, and where parents are struggling to afford costs, and where, the money is going into, is not all going through to the front line. All of those things need to change gradually, but that's, not about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And of course, it's up to nurseries using their professional judgment to manage the the upskilling of the workforce. And we need to make sure that we do that at the same time as not trying to run before we can walk. If I'm not using too many cliches at the same time, but it's the same point about the early years teachers and teachers. At the moment, we've got a really big gap in pay. There is not the economic wherewithal within early years at the moment, given current funding levels, to suddenly pay those teachers exactly the same. But I certainly want to see it moving in that direction, and I think that's where we need to be. And all the evidence is that really successful countries in terms of early years have much higher levels of pay for early years professionals and have much more allowance of flexibility and professional judgment. So we want to move there gradually, and it may be right for some nurseries now and it may not be right for others, but we want to give nurseries that flexibility, because some things have to change in the system, otherwise we're not going to get to where we want to get to.
Thank you all very much for your questions. I'm sorry we're out of time, and I'd like to ask you in joining me in thanking the Minister for her time.